Hi there, smart drivers. Rick with Smart Drive Test talking to you today about breakdowns and borders, things that you have to do as a professional truck driver. And those will tell you some stories about that and how to get across the border with minimal interference from customs brokers and what to do when you break down. Stick around for those stories. We'll be right back with that. Hi there, smart drivers. Welcome back. Rick with Smart Drive Test talking to you today about breakdowns and international borders. And D. Yorker is here. Brian is here. Happy Easter. Tomorrow is Easter, and we're still all in lockdown. And with Easter, we can see that a lot of people are not adhering to social distancing and lockdown and those types of things. I don't know whether, I'm beginning to lose faith that this is working. But anyway, Farron is here. Farron, do you have international borders there in Africa? How does that work there? And Europe, I don't know whether my friend Wheelman's going to be here either from Portugal, whether they have to go through international borders when they move between countries and whatnot. But I know that between Canada and the United States, you have to go through borders in the U.S. So you have to clear the load through customs. And at the borders, you have to stop at American Customs. Sometimes you'll have what's called PARS, and PARS is basically like the scanning strip that they have at the grocery store. They scan the code and then they know whether the load has already been pre-cleared, like all of the paperwork's been done and whatnot, and then you simply carry on your way. A lot of times the PARS didn't work for me because I had multiple loads on the truck, so there was always one of them kind of held up the works sort of thing. And so when you show up at the customs at the border, most of the time when you're going into American Customs, you have to go into the building. So you got to go around, park your truck in the parking lot, go in, find your broker, and you'll have a customs broker. You go to the customs broker and then you go back to American Customs. There's an office downstairs. So usually the custom brokers are upstairs in the building where the American Customs officers work. Customs brokers are upstairs and the office is up there. You go up there, you see your customs broker, 20 minutes, half an hour, and then you go down to American Customs, hand in your paperwork. Sometimes they'll process you right away if you wait in a line. Other times you sit down and they'll process your paperwork, and then once they process your paperwork, they tell you can go, and you're cleared of the border. Farron says, yes, they do in Africa. They do have international borders. Jonathan's here from New York City, and D. Yorker is here as well. So we got a few people here. And if you have any questions about, driving truck, running long haul, those types of things, let me know, and we'll definitely help you out. Farron, we do not in every African country, but most of them, yes. One can't just get in. There is a process. Yes, and there's a process at most international borders, and I suspect it's the same in Europe. You can't just, load up a commercial truck with a load of freight and just head from one place to the other. And later on, I'll tell you a story, not today, but I'll tell you a story later on in the storytelling process here, depending on how long this lasts, of me trying to go across into the United States without a letter from the kid's mom, and trying to get the kids into the U.S. When I was going down to shoot a video, actually the video with Jen on low eyesight. But my first experience of going into the States was when I was working as hauling furniture. We had an in-transit permit. We were going up to Sault Ste. Marie, so we went down through Sarnia, through Michigan, and then up to Sault Ste. Marie. It was a lot shorter than going the other way around, Lake Huron, Georgian Bay, to Sault Ste. Marie. So we had an in-transit permit. We get up to Sault Ste. Marie, and I've got my swamper with me, John. The other thing that you need to know about international borders is that if you have a criminal record, you can't cross an international border. They don't want our criminals. And John neglected to tell me, or failed to tell me, whichever one, I don't know, failed to tell me that he had a criminal record, that he had been charged for minor assault. And so we went across the border. Interestingly enough, we went through American Customs, cleared the permit, the in-transit permit, because you got to stop at American Customs, say, listen, I got an in-transit permit. This is the destination we're going through. They come out, they check the seals. Yep, the seals are all good, and they let you go. we got across to Canadian Customs. We stopped at Canadian Customs for whatever reason, and they turned us around and went back to American Customs, which didn't really understand. But you know, I guess I learned later that the space between, you know, the bridge or the distance, whatever it is, usually it's a bridge. There's usually a river. At least in eastern Canada, you know, Ontario and Quebec and those types of places, there's usually a river and a bridge that you got to cross to get into the United States. But we got back to Canadian Customs. They turned us around. We went back to American Customs, and it wasn't me they wanted John. And they basically took him in the back. They arrested him. He said to me, they handcuffed him to a door, and they basically questioned him for almost 2 hours. We were sitting there, and I had no idea what was going on. Nobody came out and told me anything. And finally, they did let him go without any consequences or charges or whatnot. And you know, I got the whole story afterwards that I realized that he had a criminal record. So do not try and cross an international border if you have a criminal record. You know, and that always perplexed me years later when I was trying to get criminal record checks, because, you know, I immigrated to Australia, and I had to get a criminal check. I have to get a criminal check every 2 years for my driving instructor license. And when I get a criminal, like, there was a period of time in the early 2000s when you got a criminal check through the RCMP that it could take up to a year. And I never really understood why it could take up to a year. But at one and the same time, if I went into the United States of America, they could check whether I had a criminal record in a matter of seconds. And I was always perplexed by this. Why another government could check on my criminal record, whereas the RCMP, our national police force here, the Royal Canadian Military Police, takes more than a year to get a criminal search back to you. And I never really understood that. And now we've got this whole thing in Canada. I don't know whether other countries, the United States, Africa, France, and other places have this thing now that my birth date is similar to somebody else's birth date, and then I have to go in and have fingerprints done. And then once you have fingerprints done, then the whole process just takes that much longer. So interesting about, you know, criminal records and those types of things. Another experience that I had, and you'll learn this, is if you start going across international borders and those types of things, there's only so much alcohol or so much tobacco or other goods that you can purchase that you can bring across the international border. And one of the guys that I drove team with when I was running for Quick X, we talked about those stories earlier, he went into the States, he bought 2 bottles of booze. He come out of the States. When we went into Vancouver, he bought 2 more bottles of booze. By the time we got back through the States, we were coming back through Sarnia, and he had 6 bottles of booze in the truck. Well, that's way more than what you can have. I mean, we were only gone for 4 or 5 days, and Canadian Customs pulled him in. We searched the truck. He searched the truck. They took us in, and they were questioning me, and I said, listen, I didn't really know anything about it. I said, you know, I'm just working with this guy and driving the truck. And they took him in. They confiscated his booze, and I can remember, you know, driving all the way back to Toronto from Sarnia, which is about a 3-hour drive, him just like off his nut and angry because they confiscated his booze. And I said, you're pretty lucky that they just confiscated the booze. I said, they could have confiscated the whole truck. They have that kind of power at customs and those types of things. So, you know, be careful, be very careful, be very upfront, be transparent with these people with what you're doing and those types of things. So, Canadian Bandit, have you ever needed chains for just normal hauling? I know my uncle fits his truck with chains when he gets up to a certain depot. Yeah, there are certain places that you need to have chains and whatnot. So, yeah, so interesting. Farron, I still remember the first video of yours I watched. It was the Driving at Night Tips video. I really loved it, so I stayed and subscribed. Well, we certainly appreciate you being here, Farron, and being one of the smart drivers here on the channel and all your contribution to the community. Corey is here, Bricks for Wheels. He is the moderator. Carrie's here. Excellent. So those are some of the stories. Now, there's kind of a process, as you know, I kind of explained some of the process of going through a border and those types of things, especially in a big truck. You know, it's you know, there's kind of a process that I had when I went through borders, And I didn't get into a whole lot of trouble with customs officials. And you have to understand that I don't know whether it's the same in Europe, and I don't know whether it's the same in Africa, but definitely in the United States, not Canadians customs officers, we don't carry firearms, but American customs officers carry firearms. They have firearms, sidearms, in a holster. And so, when I used to pull up in the truck, you'd pull up in the truck and then there'd be a window there, and you'd stop at the window, and I always shut the truck off because, big diesel engine just rumbling away there. It just makes it difficult to communicate with the person and talk to them. And so I always shut the truck off. I had a couple of times when I first started, there's certain paperwork that you have to fill out. You have one sheet that you have to fill out all of the freight that you have on, freight documents, freight numbers, those types of things, how much weight is on. Sometimes shippers, when they put freight on the back of your truck, don't put how much weight it is. Well, sometimes you have to guess and kind of make that number up, because one of the things you got to understand about paperwork is that if something isn't filled out, especially when it comes to customs officers, if it's not filled out, they're going to send you inside. And you don't want to go inside, because if you go inside, it's going to take you 30 or 40 minutes. By the time you get parked, you go in, you find your customs officer and those types of things. So when you fill out the paperwork, make sure that you have everything filled out. Even, a weight number, they don't really, they don't care about that too much. If they forget to put what the weight is, so office furniture, say you've got 100 office chairs on there, just make up a weight. So figure out each chair weighs 20 pounds at 100, that's 2,000 pounds. So just write 2,000 pounds or 2,158 pounds on the paperwork, because as I said, you want the paperwork filled out, because you have to understand that these people, they're bureaucrats, and if the paperwork, if there's something missing, they're going to send you inside. And you don't want to go inside because it's going to waste your time. And remember, as a long haul truck driver, if the wheels ain't turning, you ain't earning. So one of the times when I first started, I was still learning the paperwork and those types of things, and I forgot one of the sheets. The customs officer basically said to me, he said, "Give me your driver's license." This was before I had a passport, or before you had to have a passport to go into the United States from Canada. Now you have to have a passport. Gave him my driver's license. He said, "Just go park over there, fill this out, and bring it back." So I did that, came back, and I had to go inside, of course, to clear the load and those types of things. After that, I got really good at it, and I would simply go in, pick up my trailer, pick up my load, and I would drive down to the truck stop, and I would stop at the truck stop, and I would do the paperwork and make sure, meticulous, had it all sorted, had it all collated according to the sheet, and I had it all listed on the front, and then each load was in order of what I had it listed on the sheet. And it's interesting, when I taught at universities, I never had a briefcase, right? I just went in and did my work and those types of things. And I mean, it might have something to do with the fact that you had a computer. But when I was driving truck, I had a briefcase. I had a briefcase for my logbooks, my log sheets, trip paperwork, fuel paperwork, receipts, all my customs border paperwork and those types of things. And I carried that briefcase around with me when I was a truck driver, because there was a lot of paperwork to do. And if you're getting a job as a truck driver, you're going to work as a professional bus or truck driver, you need to understand that you have to do paperwork. And so when you apply for a job, when you put in your resume, you put in your application into the company, understand that if your paperwork, your resume, and your cover letter doesn't look good, you're probably not going to get hired, because as a truck driver, you have paperwork to do, and if that paperwork isn't complete, the company doesn't get paid. You don't get paid, because that's how the company gets paid, is by keeping those records. So, make sure that you do that if you're working, you want to work as a bus or truck driver. It's the same thing as if you're going to go across the border, even if you're going across the border in your own personal vehicle. Same thing. Go up, shut your vehicle off, answer their questions, yes sir, no sir, yes ma'am, no ma'am. Tell them where you're going. Most of the time they're going to ask you what your destination is, what you're doing there, and those types of things. Same thing in the trucking industry. You have a busload of passengers on the vehicle. You're going up there and you're going to go across the border. They're going to ask you those standard questions of what you're doing, where you're going, and whatnot. All right. Carrie, when sending UPS, one even has to have customs forms for every package sent internationally. Process UPS packages as part of my job. Yes, and that's what you need to do. You need to have those customs forms filled out. They want to know what's moving back and forth across the border. Interesting enough, most of these larger border crossings, Detroit, Michigan, Niagara Falls, all of these big ones in Ontario, they're staffed 24 hours a day. And one time, I had all my PARS paperwork filled out, and I thought, yeah, this is going to be a breeze going across the border. Didn't really kind of think too much about it, that I was going across the border from Quebec into Vermont, and found out that it was a little dinky border crossing in the middle of nowhere, and I ended up there at 2 o'clock in the morning. Well, of course, my PARS isn't going to work, and I had to call the customs broker, and went to the customs broker. Well, the customs broker only came out if you called them, so I had to call them, had to wait for them to come out, and by the time I got, it was 2 hours by the time I got through the border. So know that some of these smaller border crossings, if you're driving a car or you're driving a big truck, is going to be a little bit different. And Michael, my friend, how are you? One of the most interesting times I had was, and the interesting thing is that you think that all of this paperwork would be standardized. Every border crossing would be the same from going Canada into the United States. I was going across at Lewiston. Lewiston is in Niagara Falls, and I was going across Lewiston. I can remember this for. I come up to the window, shut the truck off, I'm, neutral face and those types of things. I hand the customs broker the paperwork. He takes one look at it and he goes, "What are you, a rookie?" And I went, "No, I've been doing this quite a while." He goes, "Well, this paperwork's filled out completely wrong." And he literally threw it back into the truck. Like, he didn't even hand it to me. He just threw it at me. He goes, "Go inside." It's like, okay, thanks very much. Have a nice day. And, started the truck up, and I'm driving away, and I'm thinking to myself, how can somebody so stupid carry a gun? Obviously, he was having a very bad day. Something had upset him, but that's just the way that, that was just part of your job and those types of things, dealing with these people. So, went inside, cleared the paperwork within a half an hour, and was on my way. But, unfortunately, sometimes you're going to get grief from customs officials who are not very happy about you and your life. So, I had that happen, and, it was always a bit of a challenge to know different borders, what they kind of expected and those types of things. But, it happened. Epic, the question I asked earlier, can an American CDL driver do interstate trade, load cross borders, enter Canada, Niagara Falls, and home terminal is in Easton? So basically, I explained this the other day as well, Epic. I don't know if this is the question you're answering, but essentially the way that it works. So a Canadian driver going into the United States. So the Canadian driver takes a load into the United States, and they must take another load, pick up another load, and then come back into Canada and deliver into Canada. So they take a load in, drop a load, pick up another load, and that load has to come back to Canada, and they drop in Canada. It's the same for American drivers. You pick up a load in the States, you drop it in Canada, you pick up another load in Canada, and you go back to the States and deliver the load into the United States. You cannot, as an American driver, pick up a load in Montana, take it to Alberta, drop the load in Alberta, pick up a load in Saskatchewan, and then take the load to Manitoba, drop the load in Manitoba, and then go back to the States. You can't do that, okay? You cannot move, as an American driver, you cannot move freight between points in Canada. It has to go into Canada and then come back out of Canada back into the States. It's the same thing with Canadian drivers. It has to go into the States, and then you have to pick up a load and come back to Canada. If you're moving freight within the States as a Canadian driver, that's called interstating, or it's called cabotaging. And that's highly illegal. And you can be arrested and put in jail for those types of things. So know that as a Canadian driver, you can't do that. As an American driver, you can't move freight between points into Canada. Okay, and it's just an agreement we have as moving freight back and forth between the United States and Canada. All right, Farron, I hate when people bring their problems and frustrations to work. Gatherings at the expense of others around them is disruptive. Yeah, it's totally disruptive. Farron, and it makes for having a bad day. I mean, at that time when I was driving truck, I had enough experience with customs officers that I did not take it personally. I just left it at the window, because you didn't really, sometimes, most of the time, the 80-20 rule of life, right? 80% of the time it was fine. You know, you went in, you did your paperwork. They were very nice to you. Yes, sir. No, sir. Yes, ma'am. No, no, ma'am. This is where I'm going. Here's my paperwork. Here's my passport, or my license, or whatever it was at the time. And other times, you know, most of the time it was good. But you know, every now and again, you get those points where it's interesting. Now, a couple of things about, you know, getting into customs places and those types of things. You know, it could be a bit challenging to get in, find a parking spot, get the truck backed in, go in, do your paperwork, and those types of things. Windsor, Ontario was an interesting place because you would come through Canadian Customs at the bridge, at the Ambassador Bridge. There was also a tunnel, but you always went over the Ambassador Bridge in a truck, and that's the picture on the thumbnail, is the Ambassador Bridge. But if you had to go into customs, the customs building where Canadian Customs was and where the Canadian Customs brokers worked was like 10 miles from the border. So you got a piece of paper when you were at the border, and then you had to drive 10 miles to actually get cleared through customs when you came out. It was kind of an interesting place. So, you know, again, it's one of those things where you kind of don't really know where you're going in terms of border patrol and those types of things. So unless you have specific questions about borders and getting across borders and those types of things as a CDL driver, I'll talk a little bit about breakdowns. One of the things I was very fortunate about in terms of breakdowns was that I didn't have a lot of breakdowns in the big trucks. I did later on when I was driving garbage trucks, I did have a lot of punctures, tire punctures, holes in tires and those types of things, and I had to get a lot of tires fixed. But as far as trucks breaking down, when I first started driving truck, you know, trucks are fairly reliable, and especially over the road trucking. A 4-year-old truck in over the road trucking is an old truck, and generally most companies know this, that they need to start swapping out their trucks at 4 years, because if the trucks are older than 4 years and they start breaking down, they have to get roadside assistance out, they have to call mechanics and those types of things, and it can get costly for the company, so they tend to swap them out. The one time that I did have a truck break down, MacArthur Express, who I worked for and pulled a lot of furniture for Steelcase and ran LTL freight. LTL freight is less than load. We did have a truck breakdown. It was a 6-week-old truck, and the drive shaft essentially dropped out of it. The hanger piece in the middle just kind of let go and dropped. The drivetrain dropped out. And the interesting part of it was a lease truck from Ideal Lease, and the deal is that Ideal Lease had to get us a replacement truck. Well, I was in New York State on Highway 17. The truck broke down on the side of the road. I went over and, you know, got on the payphone. Fortunately, the payphone was just across at the rest area across the road. Got on the phone, called them. You know, a couple hours later, they sent a wrecker out. They pulled the truck and trailer into town to the mechanic, and the mechanic said, "Well, listen, we're gonna have the parts here tomorrow morning." The company finally agreed to put me up in a hotel, even though I've been kind of hanging around for 4 hours, which is kind of, you know, it's a real drag when the truck breaks down. But the company went after Ideal Lease for a replacement truck. Well, the closest replacement truck was 300 miles away. What they did was they put it on the back of a wrecker, an auto wrecker, and they towed it 300 miles to me. And so the truck didn't get there till the next morning anyway, which was kind of crazy. So anyway, I drove home, and then 2 weeks later, they sent me back down and to actually pick up the tractor after they'd fixed it. But, you know, had they listened to the mechanic had the truck fixed the next morning. But, you know, it seemed like a kind of, you know, not very environmental to me that they pulled this truck 300 miles, you know, almost 7 hours of driving so that I could have a replacement truck. But that's just the way that it happened. Jonathan saying that school bus dispatchers, they're under a lot of pressure. One time I came in the depot on my split before the afternoon run, and there was an argument almost turned into a fight between one driver and the dispatcher. She was dragged into the back of the office. Thankfully, she wasn't fired, but still I know not to push people's buttons. Yeah, and you know, Jonathan, I tend to agree with you that there's a lot of pressure on dispatchers to keep trucks moving and those types of things. Especially in the 1990s. I mean, I worked for a flat deck company, and myself and another guy worked in the office, and we had trucks parked against the fence, and they're not making money. They're costing you money sitting against the fence because you still have to pay for plates, you still have to pay for insurance, and all of those types of things. So it costs the company money if trucks are sitting against the fence, but we couldn't get drivers. We couldn't hire drivers. because it was a flat deck company, and it's tough to get drivers for a flat deck company. And, for school bus drivers, I'm sure it's the same thing, that it's tough to get school bus drivers who want to drive the buses, who want to work there, and dispatchers are trying to get people out and those types of things. So, you have to understand that, and unfortunately there's a lot of jokes about dispatchers and whatnot, and it's not warranted, right? They're just trying to do their job and keep the trucks moving up and down the road, and the buses. So, Epic, if driving a truck across the United States-Canada border, do American drivers need to stop at Canadian weight stations to determine if they're overweight, since a U.S. ton is lighter than Canadian tons? Epic, yes. It doesn't matter where you are, where you're driving in Canada or the United States. If American drivers come into Canada, you're subject to Canadian rules as a truck driver, and you have to stop at weigh stations if they're open, only if they're open, and you have to submit to Canadian officials at the weigh stations. It's the same thing if I go into the United States as a truck driver. When I went into the United States, if the scale was open, I had to go into the scale, and if they wanted to inspect my paperwork, they were more than that was part of driving a truck. That's part of being a commercial carrier, is that you have to comply with American rules as a Canadian, and Americans in Canada have to comply with Canadian standards. Now, weights in Canada are higher, so it's unlikely that American drivers are going to be overweight or those types of things. The only sticking point for Americans in Canada is that they could be carrying dangerous goods. So if they're carrying dangerous goods, then dangerous good rules are more or less uniform between the two countries, between Canada and the United States. So if they have dangerous goods on the vehicle, it has to be placarded correctly, and you have to have the correct paperwork as an American driver in Canada. Okay? So the breakdown, essentially, sometimes they just take a lot of time in order to get the truck fixed or get a replacement truck or those types of things. So, like I said, when I was running over the road, fortunately, not a lot of breakdowns. And most of the time it was simply headlights and those types of things that needed to be replaced because you had a headlight out or whatnot. One time, now here's a story that I just remembered. We did have an airline go on a trailer when I was running team, and you could hear it hissing air in the back. And essentially what I should have done, but I didn't have a whole lot of experience when I was running team. I'd only been on the road for about 3 months. What I should have done at the time was taken a pair of vice grips back and crimped off the line, and then we could have limped the trailer into Vancouver where we were headed, and we could have got the trailer fixed at that point, and it wouldn't have cost very much money. What happened is that I didn't know that. The guy that I was running with didn't know that either, and you can hear it hissing air, and we went across the scale. I believe it was in Montana, and we didn't get a fine for it, but they did make us fix it. So they put us out of service, and we couldn't continue on until it got fixed. And the reason you want to limp it to a mechanic's shop as opposed to getting it fixed on the side of the road is that mechanics, when you have a call out to a weigh station or the side of the road, they're charging $200 or $300 an hour. And $200 or $300 an hour from the time that they leave the shop till they get to you, till they fix it, to the time that they get back to the shop. So say they are half an hour away, half an hour to you, say it's an hour to fix it, and a half an hour back. So they're going to charge you 3 hours. So if it's $200 an hour, it's a $600 fix for something that at home might cost you $100, $150. So it's incredibly expensive to get trucks fixed on the side of the road. So if you can limp them back home, sometimes that's much preferred than having them pulled into the scales and having to get roadside assistance or getting them fixed or those types of things. Later on, years later, when I worked in the flat deck company, one of the things we got pulled over a lot for at scales was being overweight. And that is a big problem when you get pulled over to a scale that's overweight, or you can't get the axles adjusted properly because they put you out of service, and then they make you adjust the load. So if the load is overweight, you have to get another truck out there, and you have to take some of the freight off your truck and put it onto another truck, and that can get incredibly expensive because you need either a fork truck or you need a crane to get the freight off one truck onto another truck at a weigh station, and that can be expensive. So you really want to make sure that you are in compliance with weights and axle weights before you leave wherever you're fueled up or wherever you're getting loaded. And the other thing about that is fuel. Rookie drivers don't realize that, you know, most of these road tractors are carrying 300 gallons of fuel. 300 gallons of fuel, it runs out approximately 10 pounds a gallon for fuel, so you can be running 3,000 pounds of fuel. So not a lot of places, but some places that you go into, for example, if you're hauling produce or you're hauling paper or steel or liquid, say for example you have a load of apple juice on, or you have a load of water, or those types of things, all that stuff is incredibly heavy. And if you go into some of these places, they're going to load you right to the max. So say for example in the States, they're going to load you to 80,000 pounds. So you want to make sure your fuel tanks are full before you go in and load up, because you don't want to get loaded up, your fuel tanks are empty, and then you go and fuel up. Now your truck's going to be 3,000 pounds overweight. So know that as a new driver, that you have to comply to axle weights and those types of things when you're driving. Farron, what car brand makes the best trucks and which ones makes the worst, do you think? There's a lot of different trucks and cars and those types of things out there, Farron. Here in North America, the top truck brands are Freightliner, Volvo, Kenworth, Peterbilt, and am I missing any? And International. Those tend to be kind of the 5 top brands of trucks. And I would say that, you know, they all run about the same, you know, and they're all not one is worse than the other, right? And as I said, most of these trucks are going to be new, especially running over the road. You're going to get into crappy equipment when you get into regional work, or you're getting into local work where stuff isn't moving around. What you were saying seems to illustrate the importance of double checking things before leaving. Yes, absolutely, Carrie. And pre-trip inspection is a must. It's something that you're going to learn when you get your CDL license, and it's something that you need to do every day when you're out driving on the road. And interesting enough, when I was in Australia and I drove buses for Greyhound, I think I had more breakdowns with the buses in that first year that I was working in Australia than I ever did driving truck. So yeah, I don't know what the reason for that is, but there was a lot of breakdowns driving buses. And we'll talk about that in later stories and whatnot. So that's it for today. We're just gonna have the bonus round here. The kids will come in and tell you what they're learning. I think we had something about wind erosion today when we were out for our morning school lesson. So yeah.
You move. Oh. You ran over my toe. Ow! My toe!
Okay.
Your chair ran over my toe.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry about your toe.
Ow!
All right.
My toe. Okay.
So what did we learn? What did we see? What birds do we see? What birds do we see in British Columbia?
Red-necked pheasants and quails.
And quail.
And we figured out which way the wind blows by doing this.
And why is it important to know which way the wind blows?
Because then it's not as windy, so that you don't. Because then you're not as cold.
Right. So we're talking about windbreaks. What are windbreaks? What types of things serve as windbreaks?
What do you mean? Like trees or houses, like buildings?
Yeah. That's it? That's all you learned this morning? Birds?
Yeah, and some of you might notice that I like my pajamas. These are my favorite pajamas. They're kitties. Let's see, they got kitty. And I don't like... Usually at my dad's house, I don't like to change my pajamas. It's hard to force them off of me. And usually at my mom's house, I wear my onesie, which is a penguin who's wearing sunglasses and is wearing a whole bunch of ice cream, and also a llama that's like a light blue, and and the llama has a horn and wings, and it says, "I woke up this magical."
So there you go. So what did you do this morning?
Daddy, look. He says, I think I'm learning lots.
Yeah, well, that's good. So we learned about windbreaks. What else did we also found something. We went exploring this morning. What did we find?
We found two ringlet pheasant mating.
No, what did we find on the top of the hill?
Oh, we found this bicycle place on top of the hill.
So we found a mountain bike practice park up on top of the one of the hills here we didn't know about, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have a skateboard park here in town, and we also have a mountain bike park up on top of the hill. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah?
It's really good.
So we learned about wind erosion. That's what we were learning about this morning. And what was the movie that we learned about in terms of wind erosion? And our water erosion that takes dirt away. What movie did we learn was that?
What?
Water erosion.
Oh, it was, when we were walking, we were talking about Ghost Rider.
Oh, that was the religious lesson in terms of the devil and God. So why is
and
it?
He dropped, and the
Yeah,
devil dropped him.
no. We're all done with that.
No.
So,
Penis.
so, what did we learn in terms of good versus evil stories?
Most stories are
They
about
are
the
named after the...
Shush!
Hey.
I'm talking. Most stories are about the devil and the good guys like Star Wars and Transformers. You will notice that they're wearing like black or gray, and they always have red on them. So it means that they're evil. And mostly the good guys are like wearing stuff. What's wrong with you?
Okay. So that's it, good versus evil. So we learned that the devil and the God is always the basis of a lot of stories about good versus evil. Yep. All right. Okay, so that's it.
Ow, my ears!
Hey, so that's what we learned? Are we done?
Wait, pull your ears out, Bryn. You look like
Okay.
an elf. Huh?
Say thanks, everybody.
Bye.
We'll
Thank
see you tomorrow. All the best.
Bye.
And what's the saying?
Drop a match on somebody's penis.
No.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. All the best, everybody. Have a great day. And remember, pick the best answer, not necessarily the right answer. Bye now.
Bye.
Bye.